How to solve any consulting case interview with a simple step-by-step framework. Hi, my name is Jonas Niari. I'm project manager in strategy consulting, and on this channel I want to help you to learn the necessary skills that you need for your first years in consulting. And many people ask me, Johannes, how can I solve case interviews in consulting? And today I will show you a very simple step-by-step framework that helps you to solve any consulting case that you will see. When I started to prepare for consulting cases back then, when I wanted to get into consulting, I literally had no experience at all. You see, my former background was in the music industry, and when I joined consulting, I knew nothing about case studies. What I did then was to do everything that I could in order to get used to the method of solving business cases in consulting interviews. And I worked through all the case books that were out there. I also became a member in some online platforms that helped me to gain more knowledge about consulting case interviews. And I even did some personal coachings in order to prepare myself for consulting interviews. This helped me to ace the case and to get invited and to get an offer from most interviews that I did. Nowadays, I'm a project manager in a strategy consultancy, and I'm still part of the recruiting process, and I'm often sitting in interviews. And what I can tell you based on all the experience that I have is that you can really solve every single case with a very simple framework. And this is exactly the framework that I will show you. And what you will see is that this framework consists of 4 very easy parts and 22 very easy steps. And of course, you always have to see what kind of case you have. So do you have a profitability case? Do you have a market study? Do you have an M&A case? Or whatever kind of case you have, and then you have adjusted frameworks that you use. But you will see that the 22 steps that I will give you, you can apply them to every single case, and this will help you to solve every single case. So with that being said, let's start directly into the framework. So there are 4 parts of the framework and 22 steps. And what this framework basically does, and what consulting interviews basically do, is that they test your real problem solving skills. And a case interview is basically a simulation of a consulting project. So you know probably that if you are a consultancy, then you are hired by a firm, by your client, to solve a business problem. And you typically do that within a project. And there is the so-called problem solving process that we like to use in consulting in order to solve problems. And this problem solving process has always 3 steps. And the first step is that you structure the problem. So typically you try to understand the situation. Then since it's a very complex problem, you first try to structure it. Then the second step in the problem solving process is the analysis. So in real consulting projects, you would collect a lot of data, then you would conduct the analysis, you would calculate business cases, and then try to get to a result. And the third step is that you communicate the solution. So this means that when you have the solution for the problem that the client has, that you have a presentation and communicate your solution to the client. And what you will see is that a case interview in consulting is basically a very simplified version of exactly this problem solving process that we live on a daily basis in consulting. So you first have to structure the problem, then you have to do the analysis, and then you have to communicate your solution. This is what case studies are all about. So it's basically a simulation of a problem solving process, and it tests your abilities to solve problems. So what are now the 4 big parts of this simple framework that I want to show you? The first part is that you just listen to the case and take notes, because this is typically where your interviewer reads out the case, and it's very important that you make sure that you have the right understanding. This is the first part. The second part is the first step of the problem solving process, and this means that you structure the problem. This is a very important part. Here you use frameworks that maybe you know that help you to structure a complex problem. Then the fourth part of this framework is that you analyze the problem, and this is the second step in the problem solving process. Of course, you don't crunch any kind of complex data in your Excel models like we do in real consulting, but you take a piece of paper and a pen and do the calculation there. And the fourth part of this framework is that you communicate the solution, and this is basically the third step in the problem solving process. And of course, you don't do an extended PowerPoint presentation as we do in consulting. You rather just communicate your solution in a structured way. So these are the 4 parts. So first, listen and understand, then structure the problem, then do the analysis, and then communicate your solution. And within those 4 parts, there are 22 steps that you need to follow and that you can apply to every business case out there. And these are exactly the 22 steps that I want to go through with you now. So let's go to the first part of this framework. And the first part, as I said, is that you listen and confirm your understanding. And how is a typical case situation? So it starts with the interviewer, that the interviewer reads out the case. So typically, they have a piece of paper where they have a written text, or they just talk to you and explain the case. And typically, let's just say that this is a profitability case, and this is a very typical case that you will see in many consulting interviews. So let's say, for example, that you have a company, let's say in the packaging industry, and the client asks for help because they want to increase the profitability. And in this case, you should explore some possibilities to increase profitability. So this could be, step number 1, that the interviewer reads out the case. The second step is that you listen very, very carefully what the interviewer says and that you take notes. You see, every information that the interviewer gives you has probably some impact on the case. Really take notes and try to take notes very carefully. After that, once the interviewer read the case, he will ask, or she will ask you if you have any questions. And that's exactly where you can step in, do a short summary and a short recap of what you understood to confirm your understanding, and also ask some questions. So in this case, for example, in this profitability case, you could ask about, the history of the company. You could ask about the market environment. You could ask about certain events that recently happened that, give you some background on the case. And very often this is the first time where the interviewer will give you some additional information that help you to put the entire situation into context. And then you go to step number 6. You ask for some time to structure your thoughts. And this is the first part. And typically in consulting interviews, let's say that the interview lasts 45 minutes. This would be probably the first 5 to 10 minutes would just be, this part where you try to get the understanding. Then you go to the next part, okay? You ask for some time to structure the case, and then you go to the next part. And the second part is that you actually structure the case. So in this time, it typically, takes let's say 3 to 5 minutes to think about a structure, or even a little bit less. And there you ask yourself, okay, what kind of framework what kind of frameworks can you use to structure the problem? And if we talk about a profitability case, this would be just a very normal profitability tree where you have all the revenue positions, all the cost positions, and this could be a very simple structure. Or you also could use a P&L structure. This would also be a possibility. You could also use some other frameworks depending on the situation, like the SWOT analysis or any other metrics that you want to use. Once you thought about the structure that you want to use and the approach that you want to use to solve the case, you explain the approach to the interviewer and ask for feedback. And this is also a very important step, that you ask for feedback at this stage already, because then the interviewer might give you some indication if this is the right approach. So let's say in our example that you want to solve the profitability case. And then you could say, okay, I want to structure it the following way. I first want to take a look at all the revenue positions. Then you list the revenue positions. Say, okay, you take a look at the quantity and the pricing. And then you want to take a look at the cost positions as well, like fixed costs, variable costs. And then you can split it further up. And then you ask, okay, is that okay if I proceed like that? And then the interviewer will give you a confirmation, or you have to adjust the approach. And that's step number 10, that you adjust your approach, or that you say, okay, this procedure is okay, and then you proceed with the analysis. And this is part 2 of this framework or of this case interview process. And then you go to the main part of your case study, the analysis. And you will see that the analysis is a very iterative approach, and this takes most of the time probably of your case interview. And here you start typically with step number 11 here, that you go through your framework and explain your approach. So you maybe, if we talk about this profitability framework, you start with the revenue drivers, for example, and start with the quantities, and then you conduct your analysis. Very important is that you then ask for information that you need for your analysis. So if we talk about quantities, for example, maybe they can give you some indications about, some numbers, about sales numbers, maybe also some pricing numbers. In the interview, as you will see, they will give you some information. In most cases, they give you information. In other cases, they ask you to do some estimations or to make some assumptions. Then it's very important that at this stage, you stay cool and that you make a reasonable assumption with which you can proceed. Then you do your calculations, and very important, always explain your approach. So when you do your calculations on the whiteboard or on a piece of paper, always explain what you're doing, because your calculations might be wrong, but it's very important that your approach and your method of doing the calculation is right. So even if the calculation is wrong, but you explained what you were doing, you still get some points for having the right approach. Once you have done the calculation, then you explain and interpret the results. So let's say you came up that you have a certain lever to increase the revenue, then you interpret how this would impact the profitability, and then you ask the interviewer again for feedback. Then in step 16, the interviewer gives you feedback. The interviewer might say, okay, this is a valid assumption, this is a valid calculation, or the interviewer might make some adjustments and some suggestions for some changes. Then you adjust the approach, or you proceed with the analysis. And then you will see, it's an iterative step. Then you go to the next part of the framework. Let's say you move over to the cost positions and do the same procedure here. And depending on how many frameworks you have, depending on how much time you have, this is an iterative approach where you come to a main conclusion at the end. And once you work through the entire framework that you set up at the beginning, then it's time for step 19, that you ask again for some time to prepare your summary. And this is the preparation for the last part of your consulting case interview. This is where you prepare for presenting your solution. And if you present your solution, you first summarize your main findings. Here it's very important to use a top-down communication. This is a principle that we use a lot in consulting, so that you start with the main message and then split up the arguments. The next step is that you derive a result and a recommendation. So in our case, for example, you could say, these are the main levers that we have. This would lead to a profitability increase of, let's say, 10 million. And our recommendation is to launch a program that implements exactly these measures that you identified. And after that, finally, the interviewer, in most cases, gives you some feedback. So the interviewer says, if your assumptions have been valid, if the result is good or not, and will probably give you some feedback. And as you see, those are 4 very simple parts that you have in every consulting case interview, and 22 very, very simple steps that you can apply in order to solve the case study. You have to be aware that depending on the case, of course, you have to use different frameworks. Of course, you have to use different approaches, but we will talk about that in other videos. It's important here to understand that this structure that we just discussed, you can use the structure in literally every single case interview. And if you want to start learning about cases, this is the first method, the first framework that you should learn, so that you get familiar with the approach, so that you can ace the case. So if this brought value, then please subscribe to this channel, leave a thumb up. If you want to learn the essential consulting skills that you need for your career, then please check out the link below and for my free online course. And with that being said, I wish you a lot of luck and a very great day. Hope to talk to you soon. Goodbye, Johannes.